Welcome to this video on Introduction to Excel Functions Part 3. In this video, we're going to look at the if statement. Now, we'll look at the one condition if statement, and then we'll look at the nested if statement, which is the multiple condition if statement. Now, what does the if statement actually do? The if statement simply evaluates your logic or your statement and returns true if your statement is correct, or returns false if your statement is wrong. Now, when you have more than one criteria, one condition, you are going to be using the if statement more than one time, in which case we call it the nested if or the multiple condition statement. Now, let us test this with very simple data. Now, let's assume I have 500 here, and under here I've got 600. Now, these are two numbers. If I do this equal to this equal to this, now you see it's giving me false. What I've just done is I've equated these two cells, saying this cell is equal to the other cell, that is 500 is equal to 600, and the system is telling me false. That is the if statement, saying if my statement is wrong, it will return false. So this statement is not correct and it's giving me false. Now let me change this to 600 and I press enter, and it's telling me true, which means my statement is correct. I've said these two numbers are equal. Now that's the simplistic illustration of the if statement. Now let's look at the syntax. The syntax is simply saying that if you open a bracket, you state your logic. VT here means the value if your statement is true, and here VF means your value if your statement is false. Now remember, we said it will bring in a false statement if your statement is wrong, and true if your statement is correct. Now the beauty of the if statement is that you can actually redefine what true or false should represent. So I can say, instead of telling me true, I can say tell me right, good job, fantastic. Instead of telling me false, you can tell me try again, not correct. That means I'm redefining what my true or false value should represent. Now each time you are bringing in an item that is outside the data range and is not a number, such item must come in quotes. So I'm going to look at this remark and say, what am I supposed to do here? We're told that average score less or equal to 50 is failed, while more than 50 is passed. So it's a very simple thing. I just look at this. If it's less than 50 or equal to 50, failed, otherwise it's passed. So I do a simple if statement using this syntax. So I'm just going to follow what we've written here, and I'm saying equal to, I type my if, and it's asking me logic test, which is our earlier, which is my statement. I put here, I'm saying my logic is if that value is less or equal to 50, that is my logic. Now after my logic, the next thing I have here is comma. So I'm going to take comma, and it's asking me value if true. That's our VT. Now my value if true is failed. If this statement is true, then the candidate has failed, and fail is not a number, so I'm going to bring that in quote. So I open a quote and type fail. Now I take a comma. When I take a comma, which is this one, the next thing is VF, which is value if false. So it's asking me here value if false. If this statement is false, that means the candidate has scored above 50, which means the candidate has passed. So the value if false is passed. So I open a quote and then I type pass, and I close the quote and I press my enter. So this candidate has passed because he scored above 50. Now let's look at our statement again. We're saying if the candidate's average mark is less or equal to 50, the candidate has failed, otherwise the candidate has passed. So we'll just copy this down, and you notice every candidate that has failed has scored below 50. Now let's come to the grading. We are told in the grade that average score less or equal to 50 is F, the grade will be F. 50 to 70, the grade will be B, and greater than 70, the grade will be A. So we're using the nested if statement. Now this is the logic. We're going to say if. We'll read our first logic because there are more than one. There are more than one condition here, about 3 conditions. So I'm going to state my first logic and the value if that first logic is correct. If we state this first logic, the value will be F. we'll state the second logic, the value will be B, and then the third logic will be A. So I'm going to say, what's wrong with my system? Okay, let's move on. I'm going to say equal to, if I open the bracket, I state my first logic test, this value is less or equal to 50. That's my first logic. So I've done my L1 and I take a comma. It's asking me value if this statement is true. That's if this my first statement is true, that is my value if statement 1 is true, is A. F, so I'm going to put here F, and I put it in quote because F is not a number. So I've done VT1, value if statement is true. Now I take my comma. Now here it's supposed to ask me value if false, but I still have other conditions, to impute. So I'm going to say if I define the second condition, that value is less or equal to 70, comma, now value if false is B. So I put a B in quote and I take comma. Now when I take comma, it's asking me value if false. Now at this time, I don't need to define the third or the final one, because if these two are false, automatically the candidate has gotten A. If there are 3 possible outcomes and the first 2 are not for the candidate, then automatically I have the third output. So I'm going to say A in quote. Now when you finish writing your statement, you are supposed to close with the number of brackets using opening your statement or using nesting it. Now when you're writing your statement, I advise my students, don't bother about closing the bracket, because if that's your only error, Excel will naturally close it and display it for you to accept. So I press enter. Now look at what is done. I didn't put the brackets, but Excel has put those brackets at the end and has shown me that we found a typo in the formula and corrected it to this. So it has actually put in the correct bracket. So I just take yes, and that's all. So that candidate got B and I copy down. Now let's look at the candidate that got A. You have to score above 70. So this person scored above 70. This person had F, that means he scored below 50. B scored between 50 and 70. Now let me explain something about the nested if statement. Now if you notice, in the second leg of it, we said F is less than or equal to 70. We didn't take this 51 into consideration. When you do a nested if, the second level will take the first level as a base. So when you say F is less or equal to 70, it has taken the further, you have defined the first one, which means it's taking the base to be 51. Here, it will take the base here to be 70. That's why you don't need to define the lower portion of that particular cell. So that's all we have to do under the nested if. In the next video,